Ford Fischer, you are an independent journalist and you started News to Share. You cover a lot of the social unrest around the country and have recently had some issues with that because you had videos pulled from YouTube. You've now been, some people call it censorship, some people call it speech suppression. I'm curious where you fall on that line. We'll get into that in a second. But do you mind first just telling us what exactly happened? Like what precipitated this, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So, like you said, my name is Ford Fisher. I run an outlet called News to Share where I use basically raw footage to document situations. So I don't take any positions on what I film. I just film political activism, unrest, whatever goes on. So January 6th seems to have been a turning point in the way YouTube does its enforcement. For example, on January 6th, not only did I film the actual riot, insurrection, whatever you want to call it, that occurred at the Capitol, but I filmed the entirety of then President Trump's speech from the National Mall. So I was in the middle of the group, and when people would react, when they would chant in response to what Trump was saying, I'd pan around and show sort of how the audience was reacting. And I think that this is critical moment. This is a critical moment in history because this is, theoretically, President Trump was charged for incitement of insurrection. These are the people that he allegedly incited at the moment that he allegedly incited them. So the historical value of this footage, in my opinion, is obvious. YouTube took down the video. This was the first of the 6 videos they've taken down from me. YouTube took down the video actually the night before the House delivered the articles of impeachment to the Senate. So right when this video matters, and moments that I show in the video are even referenced in the impeachment document itself, they take it offline. And they say that the video itself is election disinformation. And so obviously the problem is, I'm not posting this video and saying, yes, Donald Trump is correct. I'm posting this video saying this is truly a factual account of what happened for 70 minutes of January 6th. And they took that down. Moving forward, they also removed a raw video of a congressman for the same reason. That was Republican Congressman Paul Gosar. And then later, they removed a video it was a live stream of 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on the day of the Capitol uprising or insurrection, again, whatever you want to call it, when people were gathering early in the morning outside the Capitol. That video had no violence. Again, I didn't endorse the views of anybody in it, but the people around are chanting "Stop the Steal" and things like that. That time they put a warning. And then most recently, I had a video of outside now President Biden's inauguration. There was a sort of religious kind of group, sort of like the Westboro Baptist Church, anti-LGBT, anti-abortion, pretty like strong rhetoric. And people from all over the political spectrum were yelling at those guys. Basically, nobody outside that group liked them. And there was one guy, and I thought this was interesting and worth including in my video. There was one guy who was apparently a Trump supporter who was yelling at this group that I think most would call a hate group. And he yelled at them, "I still believe the election was stolen, but you are advocating the wrong form of Christianity." And then he defended there was a woman who they had called an expletive because she was not wearing sufficient clothing in their view. I'm not going to repeat the word on your stream here, but basically he defended a woman. He said, "That woman you called a bad word, that's a woman, that's a human being, you should treat her like that." And so he was saying otherwise, I think, things that YouTube would probably support, but he said, "I still believe the election was stolen, but," and out of an 8-minute video, that half sentence got me suspended. I got a strike for election disinformation because of what one person on the street yelled in that video.
So they send you an email telling you that that's exactly what it was?
So they send you an email saying that you violated specifically they consider it to be under their spam policy, but they give you a specific section of the policy was violated. So to be clear, they don't send you some kind of a human description to the effect of like, it's because this guy said this and we don't allow that. In the case of that particular thing, it said, we think it violates our spam, deceptive practices, and scams policy. And then under a section of the email, it says how your content violated the policy. It reads, "Content that advances false claims that widespread fraud, errors, or glitches changed the outcome of the U.S. 2020 presidential election is not allowed on YouTube." So they contend that my video advanced those claims. I would argue that it does not advance those claims. It documents somebody who happened to make that claim once, but I'm not advancing them.
I literally just heard about another independent channel getting removed, I believe, or suspended in some way for exactly that same policy, the spam policy. And I was confused listening to it because even I think the person who was talking about it, who was uh the founder of that channel, was confused by the whole spam policy. So there must be something to this, because it's like, we're not spamming anyone. What does that mean? So it's curious that YouTube's fitting this under that particular guideline. But as we all know, these guidelines are really subjective. And I know even on my channel that I'll have a video seen by two different people, because I've uploaded two different, basically the same video, but two different actual videos, right? But it's the same version essentially, not really with even many differences, because, oh, I forgot to put a lower third graphic or something like that. And I can tell,
Right.
depending, one will get demonetized and the other one with manual review will be fine. And it's obvious that it's just as subjective even as the person that's reviewing the video sometimes. So sometimes it's the AI, sometimes it's the person looking at the video themselves. How do you even fight back against this? That is really like a dense and unclear process. So curious, like, where does it stand for you at this point? Do you think that you're going to have these videos reinstated? And then, could you tell us a little bit about what it's like being an independent journalist who's doing this, where you're just, like you said, you're not trying to endorse anything. You're just trying to document that it's happening. A lot of people may not like it, but it doesn't make it go away if you just ignore it. So people like you are out there trying to say, hey, this is happening, do with it what you will. What's the future of the kind of work you're trying to do when this kind of stuff is happening?
Right. So there was a lot there. I guess I'd first say that it's really hard to find recourse with these things. So like you can appeal them, as I'm sure you know. You can appeal some of these decisions, but usually that's a pretty hopeless task, right? Because when you send the appeal, you simply get back appeal denied. You don't get an explanation. We reviewed it and we're really sure, because like you don't get back some kind of explanation of their thought process. And I think the problem is that on their end, this is a system that is probably deeply guided by AI, right? Where probably a computer, even if there's some human being that presses a button, I think a computer is basically recommending cases to them to evaluate. And there's probably not a great incentive on their end to really be spending a lot of time on it, right? If you were an employee of Google and you have an 8-minute video in front of you that has been taken down for like election disinformation, and then it's put in front of you, you can spend 8 minutes watching it, or you can just reject it right now. What incentive do they really have, especially if there's no note as to why it was taken down before? What incentive do they really have to watch it and really make that decision independently? I'm not sure that that's there. In my particular case, because I have a pretty large Twitter following, I've been able to really like rally people against YouTube. About a month ago, they demonetized my entire channel, and I basically made a viral Twitter thread. Tell Twitter to tell YouTube to fix this. And although they didn't reinstate the video, they did remonetize the channel, and they did send me a slightly more human email, kind of explaining their policy. And they described that in their view, if you're going to cite sort of documentary value as the reason to cover an event like this, then you have to include countervailing views to those issues, right? So if somebody in my video says the election was stolen, then I have to include a graphic that says basically, no, it wasn't. Or here's a source that explains why it wasn't, or whatever. To make sure your video doesn't go down, let me just say, you can go to cisa.gov/rumor control. I've had to say this a couple of times now, so YouTube will keep my videos up. So I'm saying it to save this video, to learn more about election integrity, right? And so unfortunately, to answer your question though, in the case of that video of the Trump speech, personally, I don't think it's my job to tell people what I think of videos. I don't think it's my job to tell people what they should think of videos. I intend to be primary source journalism, and I think that it subverts the task of being a primary source if you're injecting yourself into it that way. It's forcing you to be what a secondary source is, to be analysis. Unfortunately, seeing not really a different way out, in getting some of those historic videos back online, I've basically posted them with intros where I say like the words that I just described, where I basically tell them, my audience, look, I don't actually want to be doing this, but to avoid having issues, to avoid the video being taken down, I'm referring you to this government website that describes election integrity. And as a reminder, Joe Biden is the president of the United States. Enjoy the video.
It's fascinating because it sounds like YouTube is trying to set itself up as its own managing editor of its YouTube newsroom. But it's curious because obviously you are an independent person who's just trying to show things as they're happening, and what they're talking about is a far more curated uh PBS, or even what I used to do in mainstream TV news. I was going and doing several different interviews, putting them together in one pretty package, and at the end of the day it had to be 90 seconds or less, which we could all argue whether that actually was of value to the viewer compared to what you're doing anyway.
I would say that an important part of the reason that I do this work is that my work ends up in those exact types of stories that you're describing. I think it's important for people to see the raw footage as a first step, and then my content gets used in all sorts of other documentaries. Like, ironically, like the BBC, you licensed and used the exact documentary footage that they took down from me. The video from the morning that I got a warning for before it was taken down, that was used by the New York Times, right? But both of those are obviously more analytical pieces, a documentary and a news story that was able to incorporate it and make the point it was trying to make with it. So for me, YouTube is really valuable, and it's concerning to see it be gone because, if I lose it, because those outlets really rely on my YouTube to find the content in the first place. With that being said, the alternative, right? With the possibility that YouTube just becomes completely unusable, that it ends up banning everybody who doesn't have gigantic corporate backing, something like that. I have been starting to kind of hedge my bets, if you will, by using alternative platforms. So, for example, right now I've been using a platform called Odyssey, which runs on library, which basically takes the videos that you upload onto YouTube and then it backs them up onto the blockchain. So it's a website that you independently can look at videos somewhat like YouTube. But in my case, all of my YouTube videos get backed up there. So even the videos that YouTube has been removing, you can actually still see at Odyssey. And now, as I'm suspended, I've been directly uploading to Odyssey in the meantime.
I think it's just odd because actually what you're trying to do is really less subjective and less sort of pushing one particular bias. And what they seem to be wanting you to do is add your perspective, so that, like, what is the other viewpoint they're trying to have you interject there, and then you have to make the decision of what that is and who is it you're going to put in there and what kind of credibility they have. So it actually, to me, it feels like they're making it worse for people who want to just see what's going on. They're in their effort to say, oh, this is too biased, right? You have to have another source. They're actually forcing you to then interject some bias of your own in deciding who is the other voice you're going to put in there. What are they going to say? What are you going to allow them to say? Are you going to interview them? What kind of questions are you going to ask? And you're just trying to be like, hey, I'm just documenting what's going on in front of me. So I think it sounds counterintuitive.
And I think it would be seen as really absurd if it was happening on almost any other subject, right? So I covered, without really issues of censorship from YouTube, I covered Black Lives Matter demonstrations since 2014. And I can't imagine if YouTube saw a video, an uncut raw video just of Black Lives Matter demonstration taking place, and YouTube reached out to me and said, you're being biased, you need to reach out to the other side. Go interview somebody who says Black lives don't matter and put that in the video also, right? Everybody would know how absurd that sounds. And so I don't think that it's YouTube's job to kind of declare what they see as this is the way that your content should look. And I think that if they look at the broad, like, actual breadth of my work, right, I've posted about 1,600 videos. It's fairly evenly balanced. If anything, I would say leftists do more political activism than conservatives do. So not that my channel has any kind of bias toward the left, but you'd probably find more words of leftists than by conservatives filmed by me across my channel. So I think that YouTube's enforcement decisions are kind of just dense and obtuse at best, where they're essentially accusing me of, having a one-sided video without countervailing views, when the entire point of my content is that it is trying not just to push one particular set of views.
I'm sure you've heard people who are both, especially bigger channels on YouTube or even mainstream journalists, saying, well, of course we should be taking these crazy ideas off of the internet. It's ruining America, and it's dangerous, and it's leading people down horrible paths. And your channel, to me, is a good example of why this is not so clear cut of an issue. Why I tend to be pretty, absolutist about not wanting Silicon Valley to be pressured by the government, for instance, to make more of these policies, because you lose folks like yourself who are so valuable to documenting what's going on. So what do you say to people when you hear that? Like, what's your elevator pitch for a journalist, even, which I just find to be nuts when journalists are calling for more censorship or more speech suppression, or even other YouTubers? What do you usually say to them when they're like, yeah, but there has to be a line. There has to be a line. We just can't let all this stuff out there. What do you say?
Yeah, so a few things. Firstly, I know some people who are concerned about this subject really dislike the idea of automated fact checking and stuff like that. I actually have less of a problem with additional speech, right? So a corporation is providing a platform essentially for speech, and then Facebook has taken the approach that when something is being spread that is evaluated as disinformation, then it gives you links to other places. I've oftentimes been very dissatisfied with the quality of those fact checks, where it will show something and then it'll say this is false, and then you click on it and it like basically was true, but they're like, but what's being implied is false or something. Like, so I'm not saying that those things are perfect, but I tend to prefer the idea of like added speech as opposed to just outright removal of speech. In a way, YouTube used to consider that kind of their solution, where they were describing around 2018 how their solution to disinformation was we're guiding people toward reputable sources. I didn't like the fact that I feel like they were trying to detract from independent journalists who can very well be reputable without being gigantic corporations, but at least they weren't deplatforming. Like, the idea was to try to direct them in good directions or whatever, and they are still a private corporation with essentially the ability to algorithmically push people where they want. It's just a reality. It's just true. Um, I would say, though, that to journalists, to kind of anybody who actually spends their time advocating for censorship, that I think that it is impossible to just narrow down how you're going to do censorship to just the thing that you dislike. I have found that I think there's an impression that some people have that it is only conservatives or conservative speech who get censored, but I've actually found that there are a lot of further left channels, people who would say that they oppose the Democratic Party because they're insufficiently progressive. That kind of channel finds itself censored quite a bit as well. There was a channel called the Convo Couch, which is a pretty left of the Democratic Party channel, that was demonetized at the exact same moment as I was a month ago, with hardly any explanation. And there were several other examples that happened at the same time. So I guess I would just say to those people advocating censorship, beware, because it will come for you. I have a journalist friend named Sandy who posted she documents situations much like I do, and she once was actually penalized on Twitter and I think suspended for 12 hours because she had a photo of somebody with a Confederate flag. And actual right-wing groups said, basically, we don't like this person, let's take advantage of Twitter's policies. And so a bunch of people mass reported her for hate speech in the image. And Twitter, apparently, rather than looking at it and evaluating it on the basis, they just looked at a lot of people reporting it and took it down. So that's a pretty mainstream reporter whose content is used in Now This and Getty Images and things like that, and nonetheless, Confederate flag, it's taken down. So just as an example of the manners in which this spreads to places unexpected.
You're absolutely right that it often gets framed as if it's a conservative thing, and I do think that it probably is more so that right now, simply because maybe that's associated with Trump and it's just an easy group to go after at this moment, just given the cultural ethos. But you're absolutely right that it will just go for dissidence of any kind, dissidence of a mainstream narrative, and that just moves closer and closer to the middle of people who may just be questioning something but aren't part of the cultural establishment. And I totally agree that it eventually comes for everybody, which is why I talk about it so often on this channel. I appreciate your taking the time for it. I'll make sure that there are links in the description so people know how to support your work. Anything else that you want to add before we go?
For sure. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you having me on. And I guess I would say to anybody who is following some content creator that they're scared is going to go away, make sure you're following them on all of the various social media that they have. I've been fairly successful on Facebook. I've done decently on Twitter. YouTube is kind of the one that has like really hammered in these issues. So being able to follow content creators on all of the places that you can, I guess, is the thing I'd recommend to a viewer who is concerned about censorship as well.
All right, Ford Fischer, news to share. I really appreciate your taking the time.